Cosmic people, welcome back to the Cosmic Bridge. So I'm recording this in East London, and living, working, walking around London, unfortunately I've seen a rise in homelessness, and this is also backed up by data. So Shelter, the homeless charity, say that 1 in 51 people in London is homeless, which is shocking, and that in some areas like Newham it's actually 1 in 20. So today we're going to be talking to Alex Stephany, who is the CEO of Beam. He used to be in the world of tech. He was a very successful tech entrepreneur at Just Park, ended up going into homelessness entrepreneurship. So why did he make this decision? That's what we're going to be talking about. And also, I actually am a supporter of Beam, which is how I know Alex. So I donate money every month, and essentially this goes towards apprenticeships and building skills for homeless people to get them back into work, which is ultimately what's going to put them back on their feet. But Alex and Beam don't just do that. They work with businesses, they work with social workers. There's many different services they have that I actually wasn't aware of until this show. So he's going to be talking through those. He's also going to be talking about why do people become homeless in the first place. Obviously, there's a lot of mental health issues, why it's important to him personally, and some of the stories in his life. And then obviously he's going to be talking, what can we do about it? How can we solve this obviously very big issue of homelessness? Let's see what Alex has got to say. Alex, welcome to the show. Thanks a lot for coming. I believe you're not far down the road. So,
well, thank you for having me. Yeah, we are in Hoxton. So hopped on the old bike, and it's a beautiful sunny day in London for a lovely change. So, you know, it was a pleasant ride over. Glad to be here.
It's destiny. You had a nice day to come over.
For sure.
But yeah, let's get into it for people who don't know you. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who do know you listening as well. But for me, what's fascinating is, because we work with a lot of tech companies, you're obviously in this, you know, in the tech world, in Just Park, very successful there, and then decided to try and tackle this problem of homelessness, which isn't your typical journey. So like, why did you decide to make that move?
So I think ultimately it comes down to your values, and you know, values are things that are predominantly formed way before way before your career starts, and I think I always just grew up with a strong belief that if you have the opportunity to give back, to support other people less fortunate or privileged than yourself, not only should you do that, but that it is a real privilege to be able to do that. It's a real, it's something that is beneficial not only for the people you may be able to help, but for you as well. There's mutual benefits, and I think after I guess achieving a level of success, it was never in my values or my DNA to sort of think, okay, I'm just going to like take it easy now, or lie on a beach. Always wanted to work hard, always want to be useful, and I think being useful is a core driver of mine. And I guess to sort of dig into why I sort of have those values, if I think about my own family history, both of my parents are Jewish, but their family histories were quite different in some ways. So on my dad's side, they've been in the UK for quite a few hundred years, quite established, middle class, comfortable financially. And my great-grandfather was what today you would call a social entrepreneur, but sure. Back then, I mean, I never met the guy. Back then you wouldn't. You would call him just a, community-spirited person or philanthropic person. Yeah. But he was a successful businessman, but was also very generous and philanthropic, and was supporting with his time and money a lot of poor Jewish refugees who at the end of the 19th century were coming over from what was then the Russian Empire, what is today Eastern Europe. And these would be people who would be arriving in London and New York and many other cities with pretty much nothing but the clothes on their back, no English, and no welfare state to support people like that. And so he would be funding things like soup kitchens, so that people who were living basically in slums not too far from here, which is obviously today very gentrified in some ways, helping those people reintegrate. And that was a typical Jewish immigrant story. And on my mum's side, that was more my mum's story. And I have only one grandparent alive, but that was very much my grandma's experience. Though she was born in the UK, her parents weren't. And she endured a very, very difficult childhood. She had very limited education. She was orphaned very young. She had nothing like the kind of opportunity that I've had in my life. And, you know, you can take a few things from that. I think you can take two things really. Like, one is that life is a lottery. You can draw a good card or a less good card, and that is beyond your control. But the other thing is that if you do happen to have drawn a good card in life, and I'm, you know, one of those people, then you should do something about that. You should appreciate that, and you should, you know, try and share a bit of the luck and the love around. So I think, you know, that were all the things that kind of underpinned my thinking. A few other things as well. My dad's sister has got some, you know, quite severe mental health problems, and she's never been able to kind of establish herself in work, and has, you know, had quite an unfortunate life in many ways. And growing up, I always thought that we could have done much more as a society to support people like that. And, you know, clearly the UK does better than most countries, but I think we can always do more. And, you know, when you see people who've been left behind, I always just think ultimately that's not their fault. That's kind of on us, on the people that are able to support those with challenges, to do more. And, you know, in her specific situation, I don't think she ever had a really, really great kind of job service that could support people with, you know, specialist needs and, like, you know, severe mental health problems in a way that would have, you know, could have been really life-changing for her. That was one other thing. Another thing was when I was running Just Park, I wrote a book called The Business of Sharing on the sharing economy. And off the back of that, I did a bit of advisory work for the late mayor of Seoul in South Korea, a guy called Mayor Park, a really amazing man. And that was like my first exposure to the public sector. And that sort of showed me that even kind of innovative governments like the South Korean government and the Seoul government, there's so much opportunity for them to collaborate with startups, private companies. And that's exactly what we do at Beam. So our customers are government bodies, and we work with about 85 different government customers. And I really love being part of a movement that, you know, most people would call GovTech, and helping governments to provide high quality, more innovative services. You know, I really, really hate this narrative that, you know, people in the public sector are kind of lazy and incompetent. It's just complete bullshit. There's, you know, it's like any sector. There's good and bad people, and motivated and demotivated people, and I hate that sort of generalization. You know, but what I can say is that as a group, people in the public sector are underserved as customers. You know, compared to businesses, compared to consumers, they don't have a huge range of good quality services to pick from. And, you know, Beam has, I think, established itself as, you know, a really standout service in the employment and housing space for you know, for public sector customers. And then the third thing, because I also can't spend the entire podcast answering one question, is after I left university, I was a lawyer, and I was working for a big corporate law firm, and they seconded me to a legal charity called Law for All. And it was a charity based in Acton in West London, and we would give free legal advice to anyone about anything. And there would be these legal clinics, and I'd turn up in the morning and there'd be hundreds of people stretched around this building. It was on a corner, and they would just go all the way around the corner. And I would go in there and I would speak to people. I think you had 10-minute slots, and I'd have sort of 10 minutes to unpick people's incredibly sad and complicated and messy lives. And that was really interesting. That taught me a few things. That taught me, of course, that there's like huge amounts of terrible poverty in London, which, most middle class people know on an abstract level. But it's a very different thing to spend day after day coming face to face with people at the real sharp end of poverty. The other thing it told me was that we are often getting to these social issues way too late, and we tend to deal with social problems by going around looking at all the different fires. And you don't want to go around putting out tons of forest fires. You want to clear the forest floor and prevent forest fires from happening in the first place and take preventative steps. That's where you really want to be, and we tend not to do that. In homelessness, that is happening, however, more and more, with a focus more on preventing people becoming homeless, rather than leaping into chaotic and terrible situations once people have become homeless. And then the third thing that I took from that, which I think fed into my desire to start Beam, was a real belief in the importance of marrying social impact and a commercial and sustainable approach. So this legal charity that I worked for and then volunteered for, I later found out that it went bust. It is no more. It was being bankrolled by a corporate law firm and some others. The wind changed direction. For whatever reason, that ended and the whole thing went pop. And all of those people no longer would get that support. Today, ironically, sadly, there are far more people that would need its services, but it simply doesn't exist. And so, you need to have a really strong focus on revenue generation and sustainability. Organizations cost serious money to run. We're now 150 people. It costs well over £500,000 a month to run Beam. Not far off. We'll break the £1 million a month barrier, and that's a reality that we can't run away from. And so if you're going to have an organization that's truly impactful, it's going to cost money to run. And if it's going to cost money to run, and probably an increasing amount of money if it's scaling, you need to be grown up about where that money comes from. You need to be serious about the fact that you need a scalable business model, and you need to take you need to be focused on hitting your numbers and staying solvent, because you're not going to have any impact if you're bankrupt. And that's what unfortunately happened to that legal charity. So I think Beam therefore offers this really, really unique culture for people that are really excited about business as a force for good. It is, and particularly social good. It's almost unique in the startup ecosystem. And I'm really, really I guess I'm very passionate about the idea of using business for good, and kind of helping to bring about a better form of capitalism. I think a lot of people are quite anti-capitalistic because of the direction that capitalism has taken, and it's been responsible for some of the worst problems and most obscene things that humanity's ever done to ourselves and each other. But it's also an incredibly powerful tool for change. We just need to make a better form of capitalism collectively. And that is, if we dig ourselves out of this hole that we're now in, ecologically and otherwise, that's most likely, in my opinion, going to be because we collectively build a better form of capitalism. And if Beam can be a small part of that, then that would be, I'd be very privileged to be part of that.
I wanted to take a step back to something you mentioned right at the beginning. I'm obviously someone that cares about the homeless problem in London, but I don't have the expertise that you did. So just coming from a place of lack of knowledge here. But you mentioned your father's sister, I think you mentioned, has struggled with mental health problems, and you think she could have had more support. In general, with a lot of homeless people, do they end up getting on the streets because of mental health issues? What's the proportion of homeless people that typically have some type of mental health problem?
I mean, very high. Almost everyone that we would work with who's experienced homelessness will have some type of mental health challenge. Now that may only be depression, or it may be something very severe.
Yeah.
So that would be very, very high. In terms of, how people become homeless, the way I tend to think about it is you have your root causes and you have your triggers. So sometimes a bereavement, a mental health breakdown, a loss of job, those things can be triggers that make people homeless. But the real root cause is a lack of what I call scaffolding that protects people from those shocks, that insulates them. Now, my auntie, because my family have always been incredibly supportive in time and, helping her financially and all of these things, is someone who was lucky to have that scaffolding. So, she's never been homeless. But someone without that support and scaffolding, she would have been homeless. She would have been on the street. She'd probably not be alive. So some of the time people are lucky and they have supportive families and that protects them from those things. But other times they don't. And one of the things we've tried to mimic at Beam is sort of scaffolding for people who don't have it. And I know, Mikey, you have donated to people through the crowdfunding platform, and that is really an attempt to build scaffolding for people in various kinds. So just to kind of recap, when people join Beam, they could be using Beam to get housed or using Beam to get a job, sometimes both.
Yeah.
And there are often financial barriers that people face. How am I going to pay for my training? How am I going to get my family into a flat because we can't pay the rental deposit, or we have nothing to pay for a fridge, and we're going to need a fridge because I've got 3 kids. And people face real financial barriers, and the crowdfunding platform first and foremost exists to remove those financial barriers. And we are urgently looking to scale up those donations. And so if you are listening and you've enjoyed this podcast, for moments of doubt, I've not charged Mikey anything for my time. I'm doing it above all so that people like you who are listening would go to beam.org and you would give, even if it's just a couple of quid a month, that is then allocated out to someone raising funds through the platform, and it will help contribute to them. And you'll know exactly who's getting your support and where the money has been spent. It's a really, really cool donor experience. And by funding these things for people, that gives them more scaffolding, more stability. Then there's a second layer, which is the sort of social scaffolding that we provide through the crowdfunding. So people are also sending messages through the platform. We've had tens and tens of thousands of messages sent, and that is very powerful. Those messages are sent out to people via SMS. If people don't have phones when they've just joined the service, their caseworker will tell them about these messages. And it sounds like a very small thing, but that's really, really powerful in giving someone that feeling of supportedness. Of course, it's not the same as having a tight-knit set of family and friends, but it's very, very powerful for people who are more isolated and are, really lacking in self-belief. It's very moving. A lot of people write out the messages and they carry them around with them, and they keep referring back to these messages. And people just write, something small, something quick. I read your story, I was moved, I'm thinking of you, I'm right behind you, you can do it. And they get on with their day. But those things so often mean a huge amount to the people who receive those messages, because they've never really glimpsed how much people care about them. All the support that they've had in their lives has been from professional services, people who are paid to sit down and talk to them, but might rather be lying on a beach in Spain. And now suddenly they're getting messages of support from people who are volunteering their time, and they're making a donation, and there's no compulsion on them to do that. And that says to the people using the service, you matter, your life matters. It matters whether you live or die, because there are people out there who back you, who believe you, and to some extent, if it's not too hippie, like who love you as a fellow human. And that is quite a mind-changing thought for people. So, when people start getting these messages, it's so normal that people just like break down in tears.
Wow.
They just, it's just so shocking to them. And so it's such it's just completely alters how they think about themselves. And before the pandemic, everyone would receive the service in person rather than remotely. And people would, there was, many tears shed in that office, tears of joy and relief. People just realizing that people care about them. And they just hadn't realized that, or they'd forgotten that for years and years and years.
And because I didn't actually know that about Beam. As you said, I'm a contributor on the crowdfunding platform, but I didn't know that you can send messages. So is that anyone can send messages, or just donors? Like, who are the people that are sending messages here?
When you donate, you get the option to add a message at the same time. Okay. But you can also just log in and send a message. And we thought about preventing people from doing that. We thought, are people going to like troll and be nasty? And it's just not happened at all. It's no one's ever done it. And I think Beam has been a platform that really has tried to bring out the best in people. Yeah. And I think it's done a decent job of doing that. But yeah, most of the messages accompany donations that people making, but you can also just send a message. And right now there's over 300 people using the platform. The URL is beam.org/campaigns. Yeah. And you can donate to a specific individual, or if you set up a monthly donation, then each month we allocate your donation to a new person. Yeah. We have a little algorithm that splits the monthly donations around. So your donation is allocated to what is the slowest moving campaign at that moment. Because we have thousands of people donating each month, we're basically rebalancing the speed with which these campaigns progress, thousands of times a month.
Yeah, and I think what's cool, just from my experience as a donor or supporter, is it's, from what I understand, my money's been given to a specific case, and then I actually get updated about that case as well. So it's like, I think it's the individual stories that are really cool to see, and see, oh wow, this person has come off the streets and now they're a plumber or whatever it is, and then they're managing to turn their life around. So it's really cool to see the actual results as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think people really crave that feedback loop. And so, sharing the stories, also sharing the data so people can see how many people they've supported and how those individuals have progressed. We also are transparent with people about, with supporters, about when someone they've funded has left Beam. Yeah. That does happen, of course, because people have very complex lives. The most common reason is that someone has been a drug addict, and we require people to have been abstinent for 12 weeks. People, of course, are not going to be able to stay on that track 100% of the time. So sometimes people relapse. That would be the biggest single reason. But you've got to be honest with people and transparent with people. And I think that has created a lot of trust from supporters. And what's been really awesome to see is that once people set up a monthly donation and become a supporter, call them change makers, then so few people churn. I think the other reason that people really love it is we have a 100% giving model. So we talked earlier, Mikey, about how we work with government. So we cover our operating costs in a kind of commercial way, like a company. And that allows all of the donations to reach the people using the platform. Okay. So it's a super different model to, your typical charity where you donate and the money is funding, mostly salaries, and then the rest of it is mostly marketing, and then a few other things. For us, 0% goes to salaries, 0% goes to marketing, 100% goes to paying for the things that people need.
So wanted to take a short break here from the episode with Alex just to talk about another episode that I did, episode 33 that we're going to put in the show notes, which is Through Tragedy There's Always Light. And it was with Tom Boston, he calls himself a sales comedian as he makes very funny content around sales. But the reason I thought of this is it's come up a lot on the show, people that have very bad events that happen to them. Some are traumas. I think that word is banged around too much, but some are genuine traumas. And I think what happened to Tom was a genuine trauma, which is that he lost his son shortly after his son was born, which was obviously an awful thing to happen. But he was able to see the positives in it, which is why the episode is called Through the Tragedy There's Always Light, because he had the love of his wife, right? He had the love of a community and a family. He had work, and that's how he was able to get through this. But tying it back to this problem of homelessness that Alex is talking about, often people end up homeless because they do not have that support network. They do not have that community. And I think it's an interesting comparison to make, and it just helps you visualize, not everyone has that support network. Yeah, so I wanted to ask around, because I think there's like misconception around homelessness from like both sides of the political spectrum, because I think one side can say, homeless people, they're not working hard enough, it's their fault, etc. on the streets. And then maybe the other side could be seen as thinking solving homelessness is easy and like being maybe overly compassionate. I'm just going to give them a sandwich or a bottle of water or just put them in a house and everything's going to be okay. And I think obviously you're passionate around putting homeless people back in work. And I know for years I've brought the big issue and they talk about, a hand up, not a handout. But, for people that don't know that much about homelessness, why do you think it's so important to like get homeless people back into work?
So we have a housing service and an employment service. So we are supporting more people actually into housing as into jobs. Often the two combine really, really well. So we have like a very well integrated housing and employment service. So if you're able to get some work, it's going to be much easier for you to stay housed because you've got some income. So it's a sort of 1 + 1 = 3 type thing. But yeah, it's complicated. It's not, jobs are the answer or housing is the answer. You need to have both services and they need to be well integrated. You need to be able to offer people both. So in terms of, I guess, what the government can do, I mean, for me, what's held us back for a very long time with social problems like homelessness is a lack of alignment around how you solve these very intractable and complicated problems. And what that has looked like has been a lot of finger pointing around blame. Yeah. And so you'll have different people in society saying, right, this is the fault of, government needs to fix this. Some government. Someone else will say, this is about society and, you don't have homelessness in whatever this country, and that's because people look after each other. Yeah. Someone else would say like, oh, it's the corporates, Amazon, if they paid tax, then blah, 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 they will never have these problems. And so it's a lot of finger pointing, and it's not really got us that far. No. What I would argue is that there's truth in all of these arguments, but everyone needs to play a part. And our theory of change is really based around the fact that can make real progress on these social problems. And we've now supported, well over 1% of homeless people in the UK, and that number is growing pretty rapidly. You make real progress on these problems by working together. Everyone has a part to play. And so we work with government, who commissions a service. We work with, obviously, civic society, who are donating through the platform. We also work increasingly with companies. There is a product called Beam for Companies. The website is beam.org/companies, which allows a company to set up a social impact program in literally 5 minutes and back people through the platform, gives really good analytics on that. We work with landlords, we work with employers. So everyone has a part to play, and we've built a service for everyone. And I think that's why Beam has been working well. It's because we do try and take a sort of 360-degree view on these problems and try and empower people to to play a part. I think there's a lot of people, whether they are government employees or whether they are business owners or just, John Smith, who wants to do something, but it's too complicated. They're busy. They've got 1,000 things going on in their lives. They don't know where to start. We need to make it really easy for them to get involved in the solution to problems like homelessness. And, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think I always like Beam as well, because however good your intentions are, sometimes maybe, I've done it before, bought a coffee for someone who's on the street. It's not that long-term impact, but I do think what you're doing is actually turning lives around, because it's someone, as you said, if they get housed, then they get a job, and that could be their security for a long time, right? And I think it's that transparency of what you're doing and the transformation is really cool.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about if you've got plans to expand globally. I know obviously you just mentioned a great stat, which is you've helped 1% of homeless people in the UK, but that still means there's 99% that you could go after. Yeah. Are you more focused on targeting more of those 99%, or have you got plans to
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so much more to do. 1% is a decent start, but that's all it is. We've not scratched the surface of the impact we want to have in the UK. Yes, we want to be a global social impact company, but we have so much more work to do in the UK. And it's about sequencing these things smartly and realistically.
Yeah.
So, we are scaling really very excitingly now. It's been around 7 years, but it took us 18 months to help 5 people.
Wow.
Right?
Why did it take so long?
18 months. Now we help more than that number every day. So, and we will no doubt get to the point where we help more than that number every hour of every day. Yeah. So there is a real exponentiality about that. Why did it take so long? Because we were a tiny team. We were 2 people trying to do 1,000 different things. Wow. We're now 150 people. We were trying to work out what the operating model was. We hadn't built any technology. We've got much more efficient technology and processes now. A whole bunch of other reasons.
Yeah.
But what's cool about bringing tech to these problems is that you can get some of the scaling benefits of technology, which is really hard with a non-tech organization, where you just need to throw on thousands and thousands of bodies. But that is, as we all know, that's not very efficient.
Yes.
So, that's worked for us so far, bringing tech to these problems. And, what we're now able to do with AI is, I think, take all of those things to the next step. We are able to ask our internal AI a series of questions, and it will give an answer to those questions in 3 seconds that previously might have taken 30 minutes for us to understand. We could ask our AI to build an employment plan for someone, and it will look through a huge amount of data, and in 3 seconds it will create an 8-step sequence for what a caseworker should do to support somebody into a job. It's better than what I could do in half an hour. It does in 3 seconds. So those are the kind of efficiency gains that are really crucial. We take advantage of if we're going to, scale up and help dramatically more people. And I do think that AI has the most incredible potential to create social good. And, while the conversation is understandably on some of the risks and dangers that AI can create, I also think it's really important that we don't sink into a depression, and that we also stay focused on what are the positive stories that can come from AI, and the opportunity to bring really high quality advice far more quickly to far more people, the opportunity to empower human beings in frontline roles to bring the best of their own humanity to these problems. All of these things are within our grasp with AI.
Nice. And final question: we love a story of adversity on the show. So, what's the toughest thing you've dealt with in the last 7 years running Beam, and how did you deal with it?
I guess I don't know if I'd point to a single thing. I think that the hardest thing has been a continual thread, which has been you're solving problems that are really much harder than the problems that most startups solve, with, generally speaking, less capital than, the capital that many startups in quote unquote hot spaces like fintech and crypto have.
Yeah.
So like relative to your needs, you're relatively underfunded. And that's certainly been the case for the first 5 years of Beam. And that's hard objectively, but I also love it. It's like, it's kind of type 2 fun, right? Like, I love the fact that we're under-resourced. I love the fact that we're an underdog. I love the fact that we've taken on ridiculous, crazy challenges. And the people that really thrive at Beam are also those people who have a slightly masochistic streak, a sense of adventure, a belief that, they were put on this earth for a reason.
Yeah.
And that reason was not just to, take the easiest route, the path of least resistance. They were put on this earth to maybe take the road less traveled and to do something remarkable with that life. And, I love finding these people and meeting them. We're interviewing someone at the moment from Meta, and he's that sort of person. Like, I think he's someone who likes a challenge. And I love the challenge of bringing over talented, smart people to do important things with their lives. Because, one of the real problems that we've had socially is that too many of the most ambitious and brightest people have not been doing important things with their lives. I was very fortunate. I went to a good uni and I saw almost everyone disappear into corporate law, management consulting and investment banking. And fast forward, over 20 years, making me feel very old, and not quite 20 years. We got a whole load of problems. And guess what? Management consulting, investment banking, corporate law hasn't helped put the world on the right path in the last couple of decades. And so we now need to bring that passion, but also, some of the experience that, people who've been working for a while can bring to these problems. Whether they're social problems, whether they're environmental problems. We don't have long to fix these things. So, it's a very long-winded answer, but that's both the hardest thing, but it's also, it's a weird thing because it's a source of both exhaustion and almost limitless energy as well.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to what you said about going to, good school and uni, but then very smart people ending up in places, I won't name names, but like management consulting firms, investment banks, and you think they're not, they're such smart minds, they should be solving, the bigger problems like homelessness, as you said.
And by the way, one of the things, I mentioned Beam for Companies before. We have a corporate partnerships teams, and one of the really awesome things they're working on is how to bring big organizations who are well-resourced in those areas to do good work.
Yeah.
And, we work with some brilliant organizations who are, within those traditional sectors, who really do get what I've just been talking about. And, these are things we need. These are organizations we need to keep the wheels of, economic growth moving. But there are also many people in these organizations who know that business as usual is not going to be the right strategy for the world for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And how we can leverage the resources within those organizations to play a meaningful part in social and environmental change, is, to bring us back to this theme of business for good, something we can't ignore. That's where the scale is.
Yep.
How we get whatever it is at PwC to play a major role really, really matters. How we get a McDonald's, to be the most sustainable company that it can be really, really matters. And so, this is why I'm such a big believer in kind of collaborative efforts. There is a strong narrative around disruption that exists in the world of startups. I don't really like that narrative. I think generally to get stuff done, you need to bring people with you on a journey. And the problem with disruption is it's too often involved pissing people off and embarrassing people and being the kind of unwelcome person at the party. And so, we've tried to bring about change in a very different spirit.
Yeah, love it. So show notes, we'll put magicnotes.ai, Beam for Business, the crowdfunding. Anything else where you want to send people in the show notes here? Anything else to promote? I know we've already talked a lot about Beam.
So it's beam.org/companies. Everything is from beam.org. I would say just have a wander around the site. That will explain a whole lot more about what I've been talking about. We have 20 plus open roles as well in everything from product to software engineering to comms to operations and more. And if you don't see a role that is well suited to your skill set, just drop us an email at careers@beam.org. And thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for your time, Alex. Really enjoyed it.
Pleasure.
So, Cosmic People, very interesting show. I've been trying to get Alex on the show actually for nearly a year, so really glad we were finally able to record. Homelessness is a super complex problem, as we were talking about today. It's not something that is easily fixable, but I really love what Beam is doing. For me, it was educational today to hear about why do people become homeless in the first place. As Alex said, pretty much almost everyone you see on the street has some type of mental health problem, maybe depression, maybe something more severe. Now, the thing is with the people who end up homeless, as Alex said, I liked his point of the scaffolding, right? So he mentioned the case of, his father's sister who had that support network. So she didn't end up becoming homeless, but not everyone is so lucky. Not everyone has that family, has that support network. And that's how people end up on the streets, right? In terms of solutions, I actually think Beam, as Alex said, he didn't pay me to say this, I think Beam is a really great way to contribute to help homeless people get on their feet, get into housing, get jobs, as he was talking about. And then the other thing, he obviously talks about Beam for Business. If you work for a business, check out that in the show notes. And finally, more from a philosophical perspective, I really liked his point of not necessarily always viewing corporations as evil. If you're talking about, as he said, the examples PwC or McDonald's, they've obviously got money that can be channeled into things like tackling this problem of homelessness. And if we collaborate with them versus seeing them as these evil corporations, we can actually maybe solve some of these big problems like homelessness. If you're passionate about homelessness, if you've got friends who are, share this podcast, please, with them. Leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or a comment if you're on YouTube. And we'll see you next week. Cheers.